Recording in progress.
Okay, here we are. Hi, everyone. So nice to see you. Hi, Shell. Hi, Teresa. Hi, Thaddeus. So wonderful to be here with all of you. So, thank you for joining in. I'm sure a few others are going to continue hopping in, but we'll get started. Welcome. Yeah, always feel free to chat in the chat box too. Actually, so many of new faces today and new names today. If you could just let me know where you're joining in from, I'd really love to know. I'm joining in with you today from Southern Oregon in this beautiful valley hillside where there's lots of farms. We live out in the country now. It's very peaceful. I'm very grateful. And we're looking forward to growing a lot of food and feeding a lot of people because that's a great joy of ours. Portugal, UK. Yeah, we'll be meeting today for about 90 minutes. So most of these workshops will end in 90 minutes. Sometimes we go over by like 10 minutes or so, just depending on how the conversation goes at the ends once we're in our Q&A section. But the majority of the class will be an hour and a half. And we have LA, Pennsylvania. Oh, I'm so glad you joined from Summer's Immersion, Nicole. This is so great. Yay, Hudson Valley, Kumari. I grew up on Long Island, and so definitely know that area. Dana Point, and I also lived in Southern California for a number of years, many years, so I'm familiar with that area. It's nice to see you again, Gangalila. I'm happy to connect with you again today. And Saskatchewan, Canada. Amazing. Tish, just so you know, you direct messaged me. If you want to message the whole group, make sure you click everyone. But that's all good. You also can if you ever have a question throughout our session today that you just want to be private and you want to remain anonymous, you can write to me in that way as a direct message. So let's dive into today's topic. I'm going to make sure we get into our practices. And Carolina, welcome from LA. Yay. Okay. Thanks for helping us all orient to place. Very sweet kind of global community here today. And I know a lot of people around the world will be joining us virtually with the recording. So just sending all our love and prayers to them. But here we are gathered for our Ayurveda and inner child healing class today. So it's a really important topic, just diving into this conversation of healing the child within, right? And how does that relate to Ayurveda through the lens of Ayurvedic health, well-being, psychology? We kind of want to just take a sneak peek at how all of these aspects of ourself from a holistic view are really interrelated. And also I want to kind of help just show you, today I really want to help show you, break down some more of the processes around what to do with this concept on a real, practical, like day-to-day kind of routine. So you probably, most of you read the email that I sent out that was just kind of describing as an entry point into today's session. But we talk about why this is important. So if our every cell in our body is a microcosm of the whole. So the whole of the universe and the whole of life and the planet and the solar system that we're a part of governs the rhythms of our own health, healing, and inner processes while we're here in these physical bodies. So we want to create an opportunity to align with those most closely. And just like in the same way that the sun tends to govern your day to day, meaning the sun rises, and if you're in somewhat rhythm with the regular society, then you start to wake up with the sun, because if you're a nocturnal creature, I guess it would be different. But we're awake in the day, the sun rises, and we wake up, and we're governed by this daylight. and then we get sleepy when the sun sets, right? So in the same way that external rhythm is a macrocosm of your internal rhythms of sleep and wakefulness, your microcosm, macrocosm of your every little tiny cell, microscopic cell in your body is governed by the functioning of the whole of your being. And so if you can imagine these like concentric circles of microcosm, macrocosm, expanding out really big, and then also getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So what that means then to this concept of our inner child healing and how that relates to our health and vitality, and how that relates to perhaps even the reversal of a disease process in the body, or a health condition or a chronic pain condition that you might be dealing with over an extended period of time, hitting lots of dead ends and not ever totally getting to the root, or still feeling like in the grips of, dietary restrictions because you're having a hard time like managing various symptoms. Where this kind of comes into play is there is a very physical aspect, but if this deeper emotional part of us, this part that's hidden in the subconscious, and your subconscious mind is not in your head, your subconscious mind is in your whole body. And it's the part of us that what we call in Ayurveda that is tamasic. It's a part of us that is unknown, an aspect of ourselves that we have not yet met, are not familiar with. But the subconscious part of us is what directs and guides our physiology. Our subconscious mind, that is unknown to us for the most part, under the surface, not conscious, not recognized, is actually the part that governs our physiology and directs our cells. So if there's experiences that were had in childhood, or either situations that were acutely traumatic, like in an instance, or just even subtle, neglectful situations where you as a child didn't have your needs met, or there was some kind of emotional, repression, well, this child part of us becomes repressed, suppressed, and fragmented away from our conscious recognition. So it's like our psyche becomes fragmented. And what we want is our psyche to be one whole part that has our full awareness, and that's actually aligned with a higher part of ourselves. So once the fragmenting happens and parts of us become buried, these are the parts that unconsciously lead the way for our health, and lead the way for our digestive functioning, and lead the way for imbalances or potential disease processes to unfold in the body. Now, by no means am I saying that the energetics and inner child aspect are the only reasons for imbalances. But what I want to start to give you a little insight into is that here's how that part comes into play. And there's a whole other arena that we also want to go into around, there's a whole other arena in terms of food and diet and herbs and daily practices and stuff that are physical and tangible. But really, those can only get you so far. And I feel like a lot of people are talking a lot of conflicting information out there in the world about those things. And it creates this anxiety that we need to constantly be aware, constantly in survival mode, constantly micromanaging our every little action, our every little micronutrient that we put into our body. And ultimately, that anxiety just kind of feeds the part of us that feeds the anxiety and the fears and the parts of us that have been buried, right? It just perpetuates that kind of survival mode thing that happens. So what I want to offer through this workshop and through this series of workshops that we've been doing roughly monthly, is to really pop out of that and show you a higher perspective, a zoomed out, bigger perspective on how do we relate to these energetic pieces so that we can put all the things into place and just really create a well-rounded, vital way of existing where symptoms resolve, where things become much more peaceful internally, externally, and ultimately it all becomes a lot more clear. So if that sounds good to you all, we will continue with our practices and dialogue. And yes, Jeffrey, this meeting is being recorded. And I will send it out as long as whoever's watching this, as long as you've registered at my website, so alicialyndiaz.com, then there's a little button that says trauma healing. If one of you wants to even pull it up in the chat, that would be great. But I'll just put the spelling here for you. And there's a little button that says trauma healing, and that just registers you for the workshops. So as long as you're registered there, I'll send out the recordings and you'll get that. All right. So these workshops I like to be part educational and a big part experiential. So we'll open and close with a little bit of practice so that you can have an embodied imprint of like what some of the concepts are that I'm talking about. And I know if you've been here before, then you know the practices that we're doing. They're brief, but they're actually very profound when you do them consistently and every single day. So we're going to open up the next portion of our dialogue with a little bit of breath work and one moment of just a short mantra meditation, a prayer chanting that's very simple and that just helps the whole nervous system feel calm and open. So I'll guide you through those practices, and then we'll have a moment of reading a poem meditation. We'll have just a moment of silence, and then we'll go into the rest of our dialogue. And then as you have questions, we'll have more like all the time to answer all the questions directly at the end of today's session. And you can also, engage with me throughout our session as well. So let's start just with a brief moment of centering. And so make sure you're comfortable in your seat. Thank you, Kumari, for putting that link in there. And Marianne said, it's very true, this fear-based response to disease, as the medical world does not look at the root cause, and many alternative health practitioners present themselves as if they have the answer to resolve the health issue, feeding the responses of loss of health. Absolutely. Thank you for that reflection. So taking a few deep breaths and just coming into your seat, feeling your hips and the bottom half of you connected to the ground, your seat, the floor, whatever parts of you are connected to the ground. First start there, your feet, your legs, as you take a few deep breaths and just send your energy down. Feeling your feet become heavy, feeling your legs and knees become heavy, and feeling your hips become heavy and rooted. Beautiful. Now feeling the upper part of you just gently uplift towards the sky above, while the bottom half of you stays rooted. You feel the top half of you lifting up, just ever so gently, feeling elongated towards the sky. And if it helps, you can roll your shoulders up, back, and down to just help open the chest and relax the shoulders. And then the shoulders press down away from the ears, helping your neck feel relaxed. And with each inhale, you just start to feel a little upliftment through the spine, through the crown of the head. And then just noticing these two opposing forces, the one that's lifting and elongating, and the one that's grounding. Yeah. And then if it feels comfortable, you can bring your hands to your belly, kind of like to the sides of your navel, even a little bit lower. And just for a moment, just seeing if on the inhale, you can feel your belly move into your hands a little bit. And you don't have to force it all at once, but just feeling a little bit of the belly stretching into the hands. And then you may notice as you exhale, your hands move towards the spine as the belly contracts, and you push a little bit more air out on the exhale, also very gently. But the more you exhale, the more the inhale just becomes very easeful and more full. And then leaving one hand down just below the navel, bring one hand up to your heart or to your upper chest, and just pressing down on the chest, and just pressing with like a little bit of love and reassurance. Maybe even as if you're telling your inner child, hey, I'm here for you. And just a calm, reassuring press. Still breathing into the lower belly and allowing the chest to be calm. And together we're going to hum 3 times. So your exhale, lips stay closed, teeth are relaxed apart from each other. And you're just making a long hum on your exhale breath. And this will also help you take a nice full in breath. And then you hum on the exhale. So deep breath in. First, just exhale all the air out. And then full deep inhale. Exhaling 3 long, slow times with a nice, gentle, humming, soothing sound. Breath in again. And last one. And just pausing for a moment of silence and integration. And you can release your hands to your lap when you're ready. Beautiful. The next practice enters us into the beginnings of a mantra meditation. It has many meanings and translations, but simply put, from an energetic standpoint, it just allows some energy to circulate through your being, and it allows you to start to connect to the highest wisdom within you, your guiding spirit and soul. So there's 3 syllables that you're going to sound, and we're just going to do it 3 times, and then we're going to sing a very simple song using the same 3 syllables. The syllables are ha, H-A, ri, R-I, and om, Hari Om. So maybe Kumari, if you wouldn't mind writing that in the chat for everyone too, if you need a visual, just to remember. Hari Om. The H-A-R-I even sounds a little bit like a D in the way that you roll your tongue in the Sanskrit language. So whatever's most comfortable. So the ha originates down in the lower belly where you were just breathing deeply into. Ha. The ri brings the energy up the spine. Ri. And then the om brings it through the whole head, moving it out and bringing it back around circular. So it looks and sounds like this. Deep breath in. Hari Om. And we'll do it together, even a little more elongated than my demonstration. With the Om, you want to really drop your jaw and open as wide as you can as you sound Om. So let's do that together 3 times. We'll have a moment of silence, and then I'm going to sing that same mantra that we've done in many times before, if you've been in these previous workshops. And I go much more in detail on previous workshops into the meaning, but right now I don't want to take away from the experience by going into meaning. If you have more questions on it later, we can also address those. But let's go ahead and do that together. We'll take a moment of silence, and then we'll sing it in a little, in a chant together, and then we'll continue with our practice. My apologies if I'm having any, if any of the internet troubles are on my end. I'm out in the country and I'm in the strongest signal I can get today, so I hope that it doesn't, if it does continue to be a problem, please let me know and I'll see what I can do. So for this practice, exhaling all the air out, take a full deep breath in and exhale with Hari Om. Hari Om. Hari Om. Hari Om. In a moment of pause, and and I'll sing the Hari Om mantra twice through. It's very easy to catch along. You can listen or you can chant it with me. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari 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 Om, Hari Om. Listen to the inner sound, the one that you rode outward into this life, into this manifestation of yourself. Savor the sound of Ha, softly continuing, resonating through all the nerves of your body, permeating, expanding everywhere. Know this as the sound of ongoing creation. Thank you for joining me in those practices. For some of you, I think they're probably very new for you. For some of them, they're very familiar. And so wherever you are, I hope that they brought value into your life today. You know, over time, I know my spiritual practice personally has become much more beautifully complex in the way that I engage with the divine and create calm and centering for myself and just connect to my wholeness. And I find these kind of earlier simple practices to be just so pure and so rich. And if you just practice these each morning, the ones that we just did, very simply, they would make a world of difference in your connection to inner child, in helping the inner child feel safe, seen, heard, and in bringing just overall health and well-being. And one of the reasons for that too is just that we're so programmed today and often in childhood to follow the promptings of external guidance, direction, voices, authority, right? And these practices, so simply, your very breath, the sound of hum, the sound of ha, the sound of ri, the sound of om, that is the hum of the very life within, that intelligence, that buddhi, that brilliance inside of every cell of your body, that is the spiritual energies, the subtle spiritual energies that are keeping your heart beating, that have given you the grace of coming into this life in this form. And that's where true healing comes from. So you giving yourself a moment to just reconnect with that very naturally redirects your energy from the constant bombardment of outside sources that are really just trying to get you to engage in things that aren't necessarily going to be helpful for you. Be, do, have, more, scarcity, fear, all of the other agendas that some of people trying to get something from you in some capacity. And so just simply connecting to the breath, just simply connecting to that hum of life reverberating in every cell of your being orients your sovereignty towards your true self, orients yourself to connect to the quiet inner voice of your own inner wisdom, instead of the loud voices of everything trying to stimulate your senses to get your attention. And all the answers of all that you seek is all within that quiet voice. All the answers of everything that you long for and seek is all within that quiet voice. That quiet voice of inner wisdom has nothing to prove. So that's why it's quiet. It's not going to ever shout. If you're like, I don't know what to do, I've been bombarded with all these different things. It's like you have to quiet in order to be able to hear the voice of truth, because the voice of your truth is always going to be the quietest voice, because it doesn't need to argue with the others, because it's not actually wise if it's raising itself to the level of arguing and trying to get your attention from all the other noises. But there is something that tries to get your attention if you're not listening to the quiet voice. And that is your body. That is the inner child pulling the strings of your physiology when you go so many years or decades not listening, not being able to listen, no guilt about it. It's just that you haven't been listening. That's the reality. So it's like, well, I got to get your attention somehow, because this has been bottled up too long. So just doing, say, these practices, if you take nothing else away from our session, it's just a remembrance of just center in this way, in some way similar to this, first thing in the morning, no matter what, and try to sustain it as often as you can throughout the day. So there's kind of a twofold approach. So one of the things that happens is that quiet guiding voice, that intelligence within, that spark of buddhi or divine subtle energy intelligence within your every cell is the spiritual energy that's trying to guide your body. It is ultimately guiding your body, but sometimes it's veiled a bit and becomes distorted. And if during those first 7 years of life, when Ayurveda says your subconscious mind is developed in the first 7 years of life, and so every imprint of you were getting and receiving energetically during the early childhood creates a samskara, or a habituated way of being, interpreting, assuming, experiencing the world around you. And so that could be through a lens of fear. That could be a lens through many different types of imprints that comes up. I'm sure you each have your own examples, and just you can take a moment to reflect on those just as we're in this dialogue, or like asking yourself like, yeah, what was my general disposition as a child, and what was my general relationship towards my parents, and that ends up being part of the general, or how did I feel like in terms of receiving love, affection, attention, support, encouragement from my parental figures or my guardians. Like, what was that like for me? And just starting to be like, oh, well, those, either you see how the adults in your world interrelated with one another, or how they related to money, how they related to work, how they related to each other, how they related to diet and food, how they related to, you name it, any kind of responsibility that you have in adulthood. And you either watch that, and then some part of you goes, I want to do the exact opposite of that, or you just unconsciously emulate that and do that. Or there's the direct relationship. So there's what you observed in the world around you, and then some part of you decided, I'm either going to, I want to do just like that, or I'm going to unconsciously do like that, or I don't want to do like that. And then there's the direct relationship and interrelationship that you had with the parents and guardians. And were your needs met? Were your physical needs met, but not your emotional needs yet? Was there instability there? What were the things that were imprinted? Were you allowed to be your fully expressed, joyful child self? I think all of us here will have that in common, that no, there was something lacking. That's why we have been drawn to this work. And, for me personally, I had a number of like really severe health issues in my early 20s that I went to all these doctors for, and they all told me nothing was wrong with me. And I was like, I'm in excruciating pain. Like, how is there nothing wrong with me? You're going to put tubes in me and check everything, take blood and do all this stuff, and you're going to say there's nothing wrong? Like, I was bewildered. I was like so sick and so exhausted, and I just couldn't understand what was going on. And finally, and I also didn't remember, like, it was buried in my subconscious, the early childhood traumas, the abuses that had happened, the things that my memory had to black out so that it could protect me, so that I could function. Our minds and our being has a brilliant survival mechanism, and we're privileged enough today to be in this conversation of healing those traumas. It is a great privilege that we get to even be exposed to a different way of relating to ourselves, because the ways that traumas gets passed on through generations and generations never had that opportunity. So we're fortunate to, be able to start looking at those things. So just keep that in mind. There's no right or wrong in any direction of this, but we also can't undermine ourselves and be like, okay, we're actually of a generation, or we are of a time period and moment where we have had enough safety in our being to like be in this conversation, and to start to refine some of the nuances of what needs to be healed on the subtle levels. And that's big, holy work, and it's beautiful work. And so I'm going off on a big tangent now. I don't know what my original thought was, but basically, just remembering that, it's a privilege to be in this conversation. Let me see if I can go back to where my train went off. If anybody wants to put it in the chat, that would be a huge help. I'm like, what was my point? I actually had a point, and then I went off on a million different pieces. But nonetheless, I think I was just bringing it back to this idea that, okay, inner child, and ultimately my point is coming back to this flame of intelligence within. So the path is twofold. So first, it's like on one level, we want to increase our connection to true self And then secondarily, I was talking about the veils of distortion. That's what it was. So we have all these veils that have somehow distorted some of the signals that are governing those subtle spiritual energies from, functioning optimally in our body, in our mind, in our spirit, in our emotions. And so we in this twofold path, very, very simply put, we want to enhance our divine connection, our connection to ourselves, to that quiet voice of inner wisdom and divine guidance within. And that's what we were saying, the early morning practices. Little side note on that. The early morning is the most important because early morning is the microcosm of the macrocosm of your early childhood. So if there was early childhood imprints, then just being able to connect with your unique essence, not the aspect of the divine or practices that you think you should do, but you connecting with your unique essence and God, the divine creator, wisdom within, higher self, in whatever way that feels most supportive for you. But like giving yourself the opportunity to do that first thing in the morning is the most supportive time for rewriting early childhood imprints, for rewriting them towards your true nature and expression. And then we talked about, okay, lifting these veils, refining some of the distortions. And there's a number of different ways to do that because we want to remove the things, bring anything from the subconscious that's been buried and dark, bring it to the light. And so I was telling a little bit about my own story, and I was having all these physical health situations. In Ayurveda, there's 6 stages of disease progression. And in Western medicine, they don't know it as 6 stages of progression. They're just like, we need to find a cure for this, and we have no idea what it is. But they're only aware of really from an Ayurvedic perspective what stage 5 and 6 would be. And so quite honestly, when we're talking about chronic illness and disease progression, Western medicine is brilliant in so many ways, and every aspect of medicine has a place somewhere. But we want to empower you with understanding how to be, a bit of a sovereign leader around your own health and well-being, whether that be physical health, emotional health, all those aspects. But for me, the illnesses or diseases that I was starting to experience kind of ended in stage 4. So Western medicine, that's why they kept telling me nothing was wrong with me. But then when I learned the stages, I was like, oh, okay, now I can reverse stage 4, 3, 2, 1 through these methods. And it never progressed to stage 5 and 6, but now I understand the more subtle science of how to heal. And part of that was purification on an energetic level with being able to healthfully reconnect with and unearth these different fragmented aspects of my inner child and bring healing to those parts, those things, memories that I had repressed, those things that I had forgotten all about that were just playing out in my physiology, trying to get my attention. And it was the greatest gift in my life, the fact that I went through those illnesses and hardships, because it brought me very deep into my spiritual path. It brought me down the path of going to India and studying Ayurveda and healing in a very deep way and helping many other people heal and be here in this conversation with you. So somehow everything that you're going through or experiencing is all happening for you, not to you. But we can start to understand that how is it working for me by just connecting with that subtle, quiet voice within. So, okay. Hi, Anne. So good to see you. I'm glad you're here from Germany. It's lovely, lovely to see you again. Okay, just checking in on the chat and making sure we didn't have any other questions. I'll continue. Okay, so sparking or fanning the flame of this intelligence within is one kind of aspect that we're looking at today. And then the second aspect that we're looking at today is lifting the veils that distort perception. And so one of the things that happens, or one of the things that I wanted to refine for you guys today, is this concept of inner child. So generally speaking, we all have a child self that's within us that remains a child no matter how old we get. That part of us that is always connected to awe and wonder and creativity and simplicity, and who, you know, this is like the healthy expression of the inner child. That part of us that is just innocent, pure, so sweet, and just joyous, right? And it's also that part of us that in its innocence feels a number of different things and is a bit vulnerable and is sensitive to the world around it. It's that part of you that you want to, you know, have some protection and make sure he or she feels safe and cared for and all of that. So from a very fundamental level, we know that there's a healthy expression of our inner child that we want to always stay connected with throughout our life. And then we want to look at, okay, well, at what aspects of the child from the past where its needs weren't met, is it still suffering? Or at some point, known or unknown to me, did my, you know, inner child endure some kind of traumatic incidents, loss, neglect, abuse in any way? And recognize that when we say the term inner child, what we're really meaning is actually inner children. So you have many different children within. And this is kind of where I'm bridging out of traditional Ayurveda as I've kind of come to integrate this work with Ayurveda. And I want to share a bit about more how Ayurveda looks at the whole healing of this, but I want to dive into some language that's a bit outside of that right now, if I may, just so we can just start to churn these ideas of like inner child, inner children. So there's many different inner children that live inside of you, and particularly if there were aspects of you that did endure some kind of trauma or neglect or something, there's aspects of the inner children, different parts that usually get frozen in time. So you might have one inner child that was 4 years old that experienced something, and they're still stuck in that place. And then you might have another inner child that experienced something at 8 years old, or from the years of 6 to 9 years old, that, you know, had a period of life that was a certain way, and that part of your inner child might be frozen in that time period. So, and so on and so on. And so we go through into adulthood, and one of the things that happens, especially if there was like a need not met or some kind of trauma, is that that child or those children that were frozen in different pockets of time all become fragmented aspects of our psyche that become buried. And they become buried and protected by another part that develops. So sometimes the little 4-year-old that had a major trauma gets buried and exiled away, and the 6-year-old part of you becomes its protector. Some resilient part of you that had to take over to be like, we can't remember that thing because like we literally can't go on with our lives if we're not, and she's not old enough to digest that situation, to understand, to comprehend, to create right relationship with it. So the emotions and that frozen moment in time and that, say, 4-year-old aspect of the inner child gets buried. And she has a gatekeeper. He or she has a gatekeeper, and that's a protector. So over the years, that protector creates some kind of defense mechanisms to try to make sure that no matter what, that part of you stays safe and buried. And their main goal is to like, so you stay safe and buried so that you don't get hurt like that again. And then this happens, however many times that there were these situations, memories, situations, frozen aspects of time. But what happens is we go on and we grow up, we get older, we mature, and we develop different aspects of our mind that are rational and mature. We maybe even follow a spiritual path that really serves us. And then at some point, years, decades later, these feelings start coming up, or certain situations that register to you. This is where the distortions come in, because you experience a situation where to some part of you it feels like that thing that happened, and you might not consciously remember it, but you react in such a way that is just not what's really happening. Or you have a hard time trusting yourself in general, and you're like, I don't know, through my whole childhood, maybe that child, like I was always told like I shouldn't feel what I feel, or I'm not perceiving what what I express that I'm perceiving. So the signals get distorted, and then you go into adulthood and you're like, I'm in another situation that feels a little off, like, and you run the other way. It happens a lot with, especially like intimate relationships or partnerships, where those projections can happen on one another, because it's like, oh, you remind me of, it's not a rational thing. Like you probably wouldn't ever even say this to your partner, but it, on some subtle level, this behavior of this person reminds me of whoever. Or let's not even take it to a partner relationship, but just a stranger on the street, or someone that seems kind that you meet, but you're like, oh, there's something about the way that person looks, the environment that I'm in, whatever the situation. Like I'll give a really obvious like example, is there was one of the traumas from my childhood involved, this adult that was influencing my life. Him and his family owned a bar. And so there were times where I had to go in there as a child, and like just the energy of that place was so oppressive, and there was so much like so much violence and stuff that happened that I was like around in that environment. So once I got into like college age, and that's where all my friends, wanted to go, I was just like, I can't, like I just couldn't go in there, and I wanted nothing to do with anything to do with that scene, and I didn't know why, but that would be just like an obvious example. So there's certain tendencies, like obviously I still don't want to spend time in those places in terms of like health and well-being and belief systems and whatnot, but I'm just saying, like in general, right? It could be any place, it could be any environment. So just reflecting for yourself. Sometimes you might have some of these come to top of mind as we're talking right now, like situations or things that you already feel like an aversion to. And then, or it might just be as things come up, if you can cultivate your morning practice and sit in a state of witnessing, meaning you're sitting in your seat of self, your true self. Now, whatever happens, you're just watching it unfold, and you're like, oh, this situation arose, and I feel an aversion or a tightness towards this person or this situation, and I'm not sure why. Rather than making yourself wrong for that immediately, give yourself permission and space to just notice what you notice. So it's a huge gift to the inner child and all the inner children is to, you can write this one down. If you haven't been taking notes, write this one down. Never make myself wrong. Never make myself wrong. Whatever arises, to notice it and to give space for whatever you feel around a particular thing that's triggering you or that's initiating some kind of feeling. And by doing this, by just noticing and witnessing, so you're following this twofold step. So you're establishing some connection with your true self, with clarity in the morning, and you're trying to hold that as often throughout the day, such that when you engage with something that feels a little bit off or that brings up some anxiety for you, whether it's a thought or an actual thing that happens in the environment around you, you just take a moment of pause and give yourself space to notice. When you notice it, you might start to realize which part of me is coming to the surface right now. And even if you don't identify a part, you just being gently, openly, and from an accepting space with that part of you, not making it wrong. So this is your aversion, your frustration, your anger, your fear, whatever emotion you might be noticing come up to the surface, anxiousness. Instead of making it wrong and trying to change yourself, what if you realize that, oh, those emotions are just coming from one of my inner children? Okay, sweetie, what do you need? Let me just be here with you. This is the way to let me just be here with you. Whatever you feel, you can, and whatever you need to share, you can share that with me. And in that moment, you are becoming the parent to your inner child, your parent to that child that child maybe didn't have, maybe never had, or didn't have as often as it needed. And it doesn't negate any of the good and privileges and loving attention that you did get as a child, but it's just being very honest. Okay, this is arising. Okay, sweetie, even if it's irrational, even if the mature part of me doesn't think that this should be a big deal or whatever, putting all of those judgments, criticisms, assessments aside and just being with that part and being, okay, whatever you need, and just listening. So I use this example. It might have just been in our client call the other day in a client call the other day. But we have one of our landmates here, has his daughter here part-time. And no matter what temper tantrum she's going through, or she's a little 3.5-year-old, no matter what she's feeling emotionally, no matter what she's like, I hate you, daddy, like going through, and she's actually a very sweet child. She's not like going through this all the time, but when she does go through it, he's just so present. He doesn't make her wrong for it. He doesn't yell at her. He doesn't, punish her. He doesn't let her walk all over her. He's like, okay, if you need space and you're going to be, really then I'm going to give you space. And so now she just starts to say, if she starts to feel emotionally challenged, she goes, I need space. And then she'll go take her space herself. And so it's just such an amazing reminder. So when I get to see him and parenting, I'm like, oh, that's just like, it's so sweet. Like, wow, if only our parents, gave us some of those languages, or if us as parents knew that was even an option. So it's all growth process. But regardless of any of that other stuff, if when you feel emotion arise, when you feel a trigger arise, when you feel something that feels off, just letting it bloom, just like a flower blooms, and just watching it. Instead of pushing it down or making it wrong, you can reparent that part of you and give that part of you a voice. Because whatever's coming to the surface means that it's ripe. Whatever's coming to the surface means that it's ripe. So if we're following these rhythms of nature and something's ripening, we want it to be able to blossom. Just like we want the flowers to blossom, just like we want the veggies in our garden to blossom and create fruits and veggies for us to eat. Just like you don't withhold your urine and feces if it's ripe to go. Call of nature. You're not going to be like, no, that's bad. I can't let that out. It's like, it's just a part of the process. Emotions need to come out. Everything needs to come out and move through and keep moving. That's what health is and life is. All of these processes are moving. So the first step in order to help lift these veils of distortion, it's when we hold in all of that the veils become thicker and more distorted. And then we keep creating these situations or manifesting these situations in our life with these same fears that provoke the same fears, challenges over and over and over again. And instead, if we can just lean into them lovingly and be like, oh, here's this situation showing itself again. It's all happening for me. This is all happening for me in my healing. How can I just hold this part of me and allow it to come forward, just like I would hold a child that I love and let it express itself. It doesn't matter what irrational thing it might be feeling or saying, or how many waves come through, just holding that part lovingly. And if your sincere prayer is for purification of self so that you may be, everyone's goal is different, but so that you may be a servant to the divine, or so that you may be the wholest, most loving version of yourself, whatever your, higher goal is there. But if your sincere prayer is for purification, then it just allows for whatever needs to move that has been stuck. And so these different aspects of self, these different aspects of inner child that get kind of frozen in time, slowly start to ripen as you allow for that space to be held, for her to listen, or for her or him, that part of you, to be heard as the loving you listens and holds them. So just going to check the chat here. Great question, Shell. Okay, let me read this one. Carolina said, so helpful to hear this. I'm so glad it's helpful. Okay, so Shell said, if you think there may have been trauma in early childhood that you can't quite remember, what do you think of going to see a clinical hypnotherapist to retrieve the memory to work with? So Shell, my personal opinion on that is that without this greater context of, actually, I will go into this part of the teaching right now. But it can create a healing crisis if you try to go in and retrieve something too soon without the ripening process. And so I'm going to describe what the ripening process looks like a little bit more. But the perspective here is not that there's anything inside of you that's bad or wrong or that needs to be gotten rid of. So I personally would advise against going into like a hypno session, especially if you don't have the foundation yet. There's definitely a place for it. And in part of the work that I do, there's an element of regression kind of therapy where we create space to go back in terms of like a retrieval in a way. But if you preemptively do a like hypnotherapy kind of retrieval thing, and you bring up something that was very traumatic and you don't have the tools to integrate that, to heal that, to soothe that, to properly grieve that, to properly process and digest whatever the thing was, then it can be very disturbing. And it could even, if you're having like physical health challenges, it could even really create like what we call a healing crisis. Like it can just create a cascade of symptoms that are, more challenging to deal with. So my personal opinion is that through an Ayurvedic practice, we actually get to lay a very stable foundation. So from a physical Ayurvedic perspective, there's, eating on a regular schedule, sleeping and waking on a regular schedule, having the early morning practices like we talked about, or your own practices of breath work and prayer and connection with the divine, eating seasonal foods that are that help reduce Vata in the system. So if you basically want to regulate the nervous system and create safety in the nervous system and create an established sense of loving kindness towards all parts of yourself and create physiological stability. So it also would depend, I would answer that question differently if someone who's, doesn't have a stable home or stable like support system in their life, that kind of thing, to go in and do a regression therapy, I'd say like that's not good. We need to put the other things in place first so that there's some kind of stability. Because it is hard to do that work with lots of Vata derangement. And Vata in Ayurveda is essentially the air element. It's aspect of movement and dryness. And so when the nervous system, when there's like a trauma, there's usually some kind of excess Vata in the nervous system, and Rajas, what we call Rajas in part of the mental energy. So there's like excess Rajas and probably Tamas too in the mind. I talk about all these terms on previous workshops too. I just won't break them all down right now, but try to translate them for you quickly. But there's usually a lot of that in the mind. So we want to do everything in our power to reduce Rajas and Tamas and to create a sattvic disposition, which is a peaceful disposition that's stable and wholesome and safe, that feels safe. And doing that through diet and lifestyle, and do that first. And then over time, these things will ripen. If you just did that, and instead of, some people trying to do like a sprint instead of a marathon, like the tortoise and the hare story, like just slow and steady with also deliberate space for transformation and healing, rather than trying to go all at it, is my general opinion. Have consistent care. Have a consistent therapist that you can work with every single week for a year, or every other week for a year, or at least 6 months of dedicated time, for healing. So that's usually that kind of, I appreciate your question, Shell, because that kind of ties in some of the other things that I wanted to share all that with you guys today. But this is a very important piece, just to recognize that being able to have a really solid foundation of safety and stability inside is the most important aspect to doing the trauma healing work and quote unquote retrieving the inner children. Because the thing is, the inner children that are exiled, that are buried, you can't go after them first. It will put all of the fire alarms up for the parts of you that are protecting that child. And bypassing those protective mechanisms can backfire. So we actually want to also deliberately create a healthy relationship with those parts of us that have created protective mechanisms. And when those parts feel safe and they feel like they no longer have anything to protect because you've created such a stable, safe foundation, then naturally, without going after any of them, those exiled or buried aspects of ourself will slowly come to the surface, and then you'll be able to lovingly heal them back into wholeness. But in the meantime, you can also send, like with the practices we just did, send love to those exiled, hidden parts, buried parts, but just send love to them consistently every single day. Because if you've ever been a parent or the mother of a father of an animal, do you just feed that animal once and think that it's fine, or water that plant once and think like, oh, it should know it's safe with me, I fed it that one day? It's like, no, all reparenting of our inner child requires daily, stable, consistent feeding, loving, nurturing, caring, and positive, encouragement internally to all the parts of ourselves. So do that over a consistent period of time, and then everything ripens and changes. And then the healers or therapists, practitioners that can also help facilitate that healing, you can engage with them at that time, or for part of that time. But I would say, a one-off hypnotherapy session would not be anywhere near as valuable as like a real steady, consistent container. Thank you for that question, Shell. So beautiful. It brought up so many points that I wanted to share. That was all part of our curriculum. So thank you so much. Okay, Nicole. Oh, let me just see. Shell said, thank you. I really appreciate your answer. I have chronic fatigue, so I'd hate to make that worse. And I have unstable life, so probably not the best idea. Yeah, and we have this antsiness, especially when there's an instability in our like living situation or wherever we are in a particular chapter of life. There's like this thing that's been we've been carrying with us. So there's a part of that burden that we have this inclination to want to get rid of. But when it comes to the real, authentic and like lasting change on the realms of the inner child healing, there's nothing to get rid of. Like, this is the most important thing. I accept all of you. I accept all of you. Whatever feeling is arising, I accept all of you. And there's nothing to get rid of. There's nothing bad and wrong about you. This is the message that you have to give that inner child. And so Shell, yeah, definitely take some time to like enter into a chapter of your life, or provide yourself as much like loving stability as you can, regardless of the instabilities that are in your life. And then when the time is right, it will just ripen, that you'll be able to enter into some deeper healing for those parts of yourself. But right now, you can still actively do inner child healing work, but not by going after old hurts or retrieving stuff, but rather just by eating, warm, nourishing, home, cooked meals, and giving yourself, loving care. Nicole asked, my BF says that he doesn't want to dig up bad experience he's had, especially when he was young. Yes, he says he got through them and wants to leave them in the past. We have a son, and although we have a great family dynamic, I want to shine some consciousness on our ever-evolving dynamic, but he seems uninterested in looking back and uncovering. Any advice? When he was young. Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah, so Nicole, the main thing here, without understanding, there's so many questions I would ask you, just about the relationship and all of that. But my initial reflection would be to definitely never push our partners or into healing or into doing, the greatest gift we can give our partners is constant encouragement, support, and loving, just like loving and being loving and accepting of them, regardless of like how their perception of themselves is, that type of thing. And of course, there's a line there. I wouldn't encourage that if there's any kind of like abusive situation or manipulation or anything like that. But generally speaking, if you have a healthy functioning relationship and he's being a good father to your son and all of that, just, nurturing, and again, that stable, like loving, accepting kind of thing is the best. And like letting him know that it's okay to do that work, but that he doesn't have to change, anything about himself. And just, kind of anyone in any relationship that comes to me with like that kind of concern, like around their partner, the first thing to just ask yourself is like, am I willing to accept my partner exactly as they are if they never changed a thing? And am I willing to like stick by them even if nothing changed? Is it healthy, enough? Are they good enough? Right? And I don't mean that in a minimizing way at all, but like, and if do I feel safe and supported, by them overall? And so just kind of checking in with that. And then if that answer is no, then there's like a series of other things that would need to be looked at. But if the answer to that is yes, then my general standpoint is just support them. And and you said you have a great family dynamic, and yeah, it's normal that as you heal and evolve that you want the partner to do that too. Just be careful that it doesn't become like I'm healing and evolving and you're not, just allow your evolution to be nurturing and inspiring to the other rather than projecting or feel like creating separation. So I hope that helps there, Nicole. Thank you so much for asking. It's a beautiful, beautiful question. Okay. Yes, great. Thank you for supporting one another in your dialogues too. This is beautiful. Okay, let me recheck my notes here. So I want to not go too much over time today. Okay, so we talked about, I'm just going to look at my summary of notes, and I think we touched upon most of the points. Daily spiritual practice first thing in the morning because of that microcosm, macrocosm effect. So putting that first and foremost into your daily routine in whatever way is most authentic for you to connect with the divine and to connect with your true, unique, authentic essence. And then secondly, some type of breath work and pranayama. So what we did earlier by putting our hands down on your lower belly and calm on the chest was helping to encourage proper deep breathing. And because the typical pattern that people can fall into is like shallow breathing and constricted breathing and sometimes even reverse breathing. So go ahead and real quick, take a deep breath in. And when you take a deep breath in, where does the breath go? Up here or down here? So this is your quick check. Okay, take another deep breath in. Where does your breath go? Do you feel this hand move? Your upper chest or lower belly? So if when you take a deep breath in, your chest puffs up and expands, and your belly sucks in, kind of like Superman chest, superhero kind of status, that's a reverse breather. And that will create unnecessary anxiety for you throughout the day because you're not getting oxygen and prana, life energy, to where it needs to go. The reverse of that, so a reverse breather is someone who breathes into their chest, and a constricted breather is someone who breathes just very shallow. So you want the breath to go into the belly. That's where the magic is. That's where the vagus nerve is stimulated. That's where the relaxation response and these little receptors in your diaphragm stretch and cause you to feel calm and connected to your true self. So some type of breath work like we did in the beginning of today's session, a little visualization of like roots, like your bottom half, and elongated spine, and then breathing into your belly. So some kind of belly breathing. And then we do the humming breath. There's a few different versions of that. The full pranayama is where you close your ears and your eyes and do the humming breath. You just don't want to do that on your menses, or if you get migraine headaches or have an active migraine headache or had eye surgery, those types of things. But generally speaking, most people can do that. And you close your ears and you hum. But even if you didn't close your ears and all you did was do the humming exercise, it creates a constriction in your throat that allows your exhale to be really elongated, and then your inhale becomes really full and deep. And then doing the Hari Om breath is also really good for just energy in the morning. Kumari said, thanks for that awareness. I'm a Superman more often than I realize. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of those things where you just can come back throughout the day, because sometimes those subtle things, like again, the subconscious feels like, I don't know why I feel constricted in a certain environment or situation. And you just start breathing shallow. And that's one of the body can remember, but the mind may not remember. And so you can help rewire your alignment, or rewire your nervous system in the face of any situation, just by bringing your breath down to your belly. Oh, Nicole, I'm so happy. Thank you for your sweet reflection. I'm glad you're a part of our community too. So, okay, the third point, we mentioned this briefly throughout today's session, but eating for Vata. So Vata, pacifying foods. If you just Google Vata, V-A-T-A, pacifying foods, you'll find lots of recipes that are warm, soft, well cooked, have healthy oils in them. The idea is they cook slowly for a long time, like not just these fast foods, right? They cook slowly for a long time, and they're well spiced. And these are foods that just keep your nervous system calm. Think about in the winter and the fall are Vata seasons. And there's a lot of Vata in the nervous system. So this is the home of the Vata. The nervous system is one of the homes of Vata. So Vata in your body as an energy is dry and rough and cold, and it creates anxiety when it's in excess. And so if we want to create an environment for our inner children to feel safe, warm, and nourished, well, then we want to do things that pacify that excess Vata. And so the opposite of cold, dry, rough are warm, oily, soft. And so think about in the fall and in the winter, you normally don't feel like eating a cold salad or cold cucumber salad, or like a cold smoothie, like a raw kind of diet if you live in cold climate during the winter. Your inclination is to balance and pacify Vata. It's just that maybe you didn't have that language for it. So your inclinations in the fall are to eat root vegetables, to eat hard winter squashes that are, soft, warm, a little starchy, to make, pumpkin soups. And like my breakfast this morning was so yummy. It was cooked quinoa with like hemp milk and pears and prunes and currants or raisins and cardamom and a little bit of ghee. And it was so yummy. And the little nut butter. Cardamom. Oh yeah. Or so like cinnamon porridge, cinnamon oatmeal. So these are kind of the things to start to think about. Soups, stews, warm roasted root veggies. These types of foods, no matter what season, are very calming and soothing for Vata. And you put healthy oils and, extra virgin olive oil, ghee, if you eat ghee, those types of things into the foods. And the oils are calming to the nervous system. You can apply oil to your skin every morning and follow some of these Ayurvedic dinacharya practices. And this helps calm the whole nervous system. This, again, no matter if you're traveling or whatever, can create stability, or in transition, can create stability on some front. So like you're always providing breath and a sense of like a humming sound, that calming sound to your nervous system. Stable meals that are warm and oiled. These are all like all the physical foundations for healthy nervous system and for nurturing inner child. It's not just an energetic thing. It's not just self-talk, positive self-talk. It's these very important physical, nutritional fundamentals as well. The fourth thing, so just in summary for today's points, the fourth thing was proactive affection, listening, care, and communication towards your inner child or inner children, because there's so many different parts of them, right? So just sending them love, even as you're doing the mantra song that we sang together, or any sacred songs that you can sing them with the intention of sending that healing vibration and that love to all the parts of you. So imagine you're gathering them all up and you're just singing to them, or talking to them kindly, or just giving them encouragement and love, or saying like, hey, I'm here for you. I see you. Okay. And then the fifth summary point is listen within. Listen to the quiet voice within. Don't make any part of you wrong ever. So give all those parts of yourself a place to be heard, seen, felt, and listened to. And then, this is the sixth summary point, is that just a distinction that your true self, your self is not a part. So we kind of been using this language of parts. This is a language that's used, these terminologies are used in IFS therapy, internal family systems therapy. And these different aspects of yourself, these little imprints of inner child, become different parts of us. But your true self, when you connect to your heart, to your higher wisdom, to your creator, to your sense of spiritual connection, that's not a part. That's the eternal aspect of yourself that goes beyond all the parts. So you want to create a connection from that divine, most loving, all-knowing, all-pervasive creator, aspect of your soul. That's a spark of the creator, and bring that love into all of the parts. So self is not a part, but all the parts need the self. And then the seventh point, in summary, is just that orienting towards removing distortion. So we talked about the two aspects of this type of healing. One is the proactive connection to our true self, and then the second is lifting the veils, removing distortions. So part of even your morning prayer practice can be prayers for purification, so that you may know the divine, so that you may know God, so that you may know your soul and your true unique essence in the unique way that it's coming through you as an individual. And as you pray for that purification and those veils to be lifted, you get to connect in a holy, healthy way with all those parts of yourself. And there's so much more I can share on all these pieces, but that's just a quick summary. I want to make sure we wrap up with any questions. Your questions and engagement throughout today's class was so wonderful. I thank you very much for that. And then we'll sing a very brief closing prayer, and then we will wrap up. So Anne Catherine said, Alicia, may I share that for me? Traumatic since childhood has been, amongst other things, the fact that I've always been left out. Thus, most of the time I've been isolated and left to myself. I can do what I like, but relationships or mere communication with fellow beings are, at the most part, successful only for some time. The current global situation reinforces this problem to such an extent that I feel like my mere existence is at stake. My sheer existence is at stake. I am under terrible stress and losing much energy, often not being able to get up. Oh, Anne Catherine. Maybe we can all just take a moment and send you some loving prayers and good energy. So just sending you a loving embrace, Anne, from us all. And One of the things that comes up for me as you share that, Anne, is just that usually there's multiple perspectives to any situation. So I share this not to just change your perspective, but to help you see that there's many different simultaneous perspectives that we can hold at any one time around a given situation. And for me, I can relate a lot as I was like left alone a lot as a kid because of my parents working hard to try to provide and all of that. And so there was a part of my inner child that was like really isolated and alone and really had a hard time relating. And there was an aspect of me that really needed to grieve, the loss of the childhood that I deserved that I never had. And so that might be something that, if that feels true for you, one aspect, one of those perspectives, that just really giving yourself full permission to grieve the loss of the childhood that you deserved and didn't get to have. And then simultaneously, once I allowed myself to really grieve the loss of the attention, affection, engagement, whatever that part of my inner child really needed and wished she had, and grieved the loss of that which I did not receive, simultaneously there was a part of me on the other side of that was like, wow, you know what? The way that supported me, or the way that actually worked in my favor, was that I became very independent. I became very self-sufficient. I became, I could spend time alone, and like that felt normal. That's not always a good thing, but like I was like, oh, I can take care of myself. And it allowed me to cultivate a relationship with the divine, because I then realized, oh, I'm never actually alone. But having some kind of isolation or separateness from like family and community allowed me in my later years to fully dive into my spiritual practice and to be able to connect with God in my own alone, unique, intimate way, only then to realize that I'm never alone. And so Anne, I don't know if my experience offers any insight into multiple perspectives that you may hold, but just recognize that it's never one or the other, but you can explore some of these multiple perspectives and try them on at different times and see if those support you. And to ask yourself, like, what's the blessing inside of this challenge? This is a question we can ask ourselves anytime, all of us. What's the blessing inside of this challenge? Just holding that question is the answer. It's not even about getting the answer to that question. Just holding that question is a beautiful thing. So there is some blessing in that. And yet I don't say that to make anything that you're feeling or experiencing minimized or wrong in any way. And so, we can, the relationship that we have to our inner selves is often connected to the questions that we ask ourselves. And there may be habituated conversations that happen inside of ourselves between different parts. So one part is saying one thing and the other part saying something else. And sometimes those voices get jumbled. So I'll share, I had a session with a client recently, and she there was a part of her that had some heartbreak from a long time ago. And she realized there was a part of her that simultaneously came in. She's like, oh, but there's this sadness there that I've touched from this, but I've moved on already. I shouldn't really technically feel that. We've moved on, And so those two voices were conflicting. And so when there's two voices inside of us that conflict, like one says, well, I should be able to be alone, but all of these other, but I want to be close to someone, right? Sometimes we actually need to just pop the two apart from each other and realize, wow, I'm hearing two voices. So with her, it was like, wow, there's two voices here. Can we acknowledge them both? There's one voice that says, is mature and is grown and is like, that's a part of the past. And like, we're so happy now. And like, we accept that heartache happened. But then there's another part that's like, but that heartache is still real for me. And you haven't held me to express that and to cry for that and to hear. So it's like, okay, well, can I be simultaneously with all of these different parts and identify them and then give them each a place to sit in my inner world and a voice to be had? Because what do these great saintly beings do? You know, the ones that we've been connected to or that we've heard about, or like, what would God do if God incarnated right before you? Would God make would make you or any of the people that gathered to be in the midst of God, would God make any of them wrong? If God was truly a loving, like, divine being, of course not. So that divine part of ourselves gets to look at all these inner aspects of ourselves, all these different voices, and just be like, I love you so fully. Let me hear what you have to say. Yes, share more. And then to the next voice and to the next voice. So your job here, my encouragement to you and to all of us, is just to just recognize them as different parts of ourselves, and just to take the time and give yourself the space to be with each. And sometimes, of course, it gets really jumbled when we're just doing it ourselves. And it's great to have someone who facilitates that, whether that's a friend or a therapist or a counselor or a practitioner. You know, it's part of the therapeutic practice that I do with Ayurveda, is like actually therapeutically going through that process of holding that space and very specifically facilitating those conversations and finding who are these different parts, meeting them, getting acquainted with them. And this is part of the therapeutic process over time. And so it's helpful to have someone facilitate that, but you can also hone that practice and skill for yourself. And I encourage you to do so. So, Anne, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry for any suffering that you've been experiencing. I pray and trust that the clarity that you need will come, and that whatever you're going through right now is for your highest benefit in some way. And just pray that you connect to the divine in the way that's most supportive and uplifting for your whole being. And we're all sending you so much love and showering you with our well wishes and praying for grace. Ganga Leela says, I'm taking that. I'm never wrong with me. Thank you. Good. Well, hopefully that was in the right context, because sometimes admitting that you're wrong can be a really healthy thing. But yes, not making ourselves wrong for different parts of ourselves that feel different things. So very good. Marianne, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. We're living in a time that we need to truly take care of ourselves. Absolutely. And this psychological education based on ancient teachings will give people the confidence and skills to go onto that journey. Thank you for that beautiful reflection, Marianne. Absolutely. Ganga Leela, what is the system called? IFS. Yep. Internal family systems. Yep. And I've kind of woven some aspects of internal family systems into the program that I teach, called Enlightened Body System. So that's what it ties in Ayurveda and all of the things that we talked about today, and uses a lot of aspects of internal family systems. I very strongly believe in that therapy. If you get a practitioner who's spiritually oriented, it's very powerful practice. Okay, my dears, we're at time. Anne said, thank you so much for your supportive energy and thoughtful words. And I understand and appreciate and support all you said. I'm so happy to hear that. And thank you all for sending love to each and every being on this call. Let's wrap up with just one closing prayer, and I'll type it out. It's Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu and Om Shanti. So just sending our loving prayers out to the whole of existence and on that path of divine realization. And may all beings remember that they're never alone, that they're always divided, connected to the divine energy, not divided, always connected, never alone, always connected to the divine energies. And may there be peace in knowing that. So I'll sing it 3 times. I think most of you know this one. And then we'll close off for today. So taking a deep breath in. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Love and blessings to you each. Thank you so much for joining and engaging in this topic today. Thank you for your love and participation. And thank you for encouraging one another on the chat as well. Forgive me for any of my limitations. Thank you to all the blessed teachers who have come before to teach us these holy healing ways. I'm eternally grateful to them and to each of you. And I hope to see you on the next workshop, which I will send out via email. So just make sure you're registered at alicialyndiaz.com. Click on the trauma healing button and it takes you to that registration page. And I will look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you all. Love you lots. Om Shanti.
Recording stopped.